While I was away on a business trip, my wife sold our house, moved in with her lover, and that's not all she did. But let's take it in order. My name's Matt, 39 years old, from Rockland, California. I've been married to my wife, Jenna, for 8 years. At least, I thought I was. We weren't perfect, who is, but I always figured we were solid. We had our routines: coffee on the porch every Sunday, pizza night on Fridays, little weekend trips to Tahoe whenever we could swing it. Sure, there were signs, little cracks that I chalked up to stress or bad moods. Jenna getting weird about money, acting cagey about her phone, joking that I was too boring sometimes when I passed up last-minute party invites. I didn't love it, but I trusted her. 2 weeks ago, my boss sent me on a sudden business trip to Denver. 3 days, in and out. Jenna kissed me goodbye at the airport, told me to bring her back something fun. She even slipped a little note into my suitcase. I found it when I unpacked at the hotel. It said, "Love you always." Yeah, always. I didn't know when I boarded that plane that I was flying out of the life I knew and coming back to one where everything was gone. When I landed late Friday night, my Uber driver pulled up to our address, but the house looked wrong. Different lights on. A car I didn't recognize in the driveway. New wreath on the door. My stomach dropped before my brain could even catch up. I double-checked the address like some idiot. It was right, but it wasn't my house anymore. I rang the doorbell. Some guy, maybe mid-40s, balding, in a Red Hot Chili Peppers t-shirt, opened it, beer in hand, looked me up and down and asked if I was Matt, the previous owner. Previous owner. Those 2 words hit me harder than anything ever has. I stood there, suitcase still in my hand like some idiot traveling salesman who took a wrong turn into another man's life. I told the guy very calmly, somehow, that this was my house. He kind of winced and said, "Yeah, man, that's what the agent said you might show up. Sorry, it's not your place anymore." Agent? What agent? He handed me a business card like it was a consolation prize. Real estate agent. Some company I'd never heard of. I couldn't even process it. I stumbled back down the steps, sat on the curb with my head in my hands while this stranger and his golden retriever watched me like I was some stray dog. I called Jenna. Straight to voicemail. Again. Then I texted her. "Where are you? What's going on? Where are you?" No reply. Finally, about an hour later, after I had called every friend, every neighbor, even Jenna's sister, who just texted back, "I don't want to get involved," she texted me. "Matt, you're being dramatic. I did what I had to do for myself. Please don't make this harder." I read it about 15 times, the words burning deeper each time. What she had to do for herself? Sell our house? Erase her life? Turns out, she'd listed the house 2 months ago. Forged my signature somehow, probably faked a power of attorney or something. I don't even know the legal gymnastics yet. She sold it fast, cash buyers, paperwork closed the week I was in Denver. And me? I was a loose end she forgot to snip. I don't even remember driving to Jenna's friend Chelsea's place, but somehow that's where I ended up. Jenna used to crash there whenever we fought, back when our fights were about stupid things like me working too much or forgetting to pick up almond milk. I pounded on the door like a crazy person. Chelsea answered, looking guilty as hell. You know that face people make when they're about to pretend they don't know anything? That squint a half smile that doesn't reach their eyes? Yeah. She wouldn't even let me inside. Just leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, like she was guarding some treasure. "You should really talk to Jenna," she said, in this fake sympathetic voice that made my blood pressure spike. "I've been trying," I ground out. "She's ghosting me after selling my damn house." Chelsea shrugged like I just told her the weather was nice. Then, the kicker. "She needed a fresh start, Matt. You were holding her back." I laughed. Like full on, bent over, ugly laughed in her face. Holding her back? I paid the mortgage. I handled the taxes. I fixed the damn leaky sink she cried about for a month. I was the one trying to hold the damn ship together while she played dress-up on Instagram and flirted with random entrepreneurs in her DMs. I asked where Jenna was. Chelsea hesitated. Then, maybe feeling guilty, muttered something about Jenna and Brandon getting a place together in Roseville. Brandon. That name. I didn't know it yet, but it would haunt me. Turns out Brandon was not just some new fling. He was her coworker. The friend she'd always insisted was harmless whenever I'd ask why she was texting him at midnight while I lay 2 feet away. She moved in with him. With our furniture. With our TV. With our freaking dog, Toby. She didn't just leave me. She erased me. Took all the good parts of our life like souvenirs and dumped the rest. I stood there, outside Chelsea's stupid townhouse, while my whole world caved in. Again, I drove to a motel on the outskirts of town, somewhere that smelled like bleach and stale cigarettes, because it was the only place that didn't ask too many questions when a man walked in carrying nothing but a suitcase and a look like he'd been hit by a semi. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, scrolling through old photos on my phone. Trips to Big Sur. Laughing on the back porch with Toby. Nights watching terrible reality shows because Jenna loved them. Were those memories even real? Or were they just the parts she hadn't gotten bored of yet? I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt hollow, like someone scooped out everything I was and left an empty shell behind. And in that sterile motel room, under flickering fluorescent lights, I made a decision. I was going to confront her. Not for closure. Not for forgiveness. For me. Because I deserved at least one honest answer. Even if it shattered me completely. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been dropped into someone else's nightmare. The motel room around me was stale and lifeless, but for the first time in days, my mind felt sharp, like a blade honed by anger more than sadness. Through some late-night social media digging, I found the address Jenna had moved to. It wasn't like she was being subtle about it. Photos of wine glasses, cozy new furniture, and even Toby, our dog, lounging next to a stranger. A stranger who was now living a life that was supposed to be mine. I drove to Roseville in a kind of numb haze, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The townhouse complex she had moved into was new, clean, and painfully sterile, like it was built for people who wanted the illusion of a fresh start without any real effort. Their unit was obvious. Bright decorations on the door, cheerful signs in the tiny manicured lawn. I rang the doorbell and waited, my pulse pounding in my ears. When the door opened, it wasn't Jenna. It was him, Brandon, standing there, casual, half-dressed, like he belonged there. The casual, dismissive look he gave me made my skin crawl. Everything in me screamed to turn around, to walk away and never look back. But I pushed past him into the house because I needed to see her. I needed to face whatever was left. Inside, Jenna was sitting on the couch. Our couch, wearing my old hoodie like it was some kind of trophy. She didn't even look surprised to see me. Her expression was one of mild annoyance, like I was a bill collector who showed up at an inconvenient time. Toby sat at her feet, tail thumping lazily against the floor, oblivious to the storm gathering in the room. I stood there, trying to find some trace of the woman I had loved. All I saw was a stranger wearing her skin. It hit me all at once. The house she sold without telling me, the accounts she emptied, the life she discarded like old furniture. It was all deliberate, calculated. She hadn't just drifted away like I tried to tell myself. She had planned every piece of this. She looked at me like I was the fool for expecting loyalty. Like I was the fool for believing that the years we spent together meant anything. There was no apology in her face, no regret, not even shame. Just a cold certainty that she had made her choice and had no intention of looking back. Standing in that living room surrounded by the ruins of our life, I realized something painfully simple. She hadn't just moved on. She had erased me. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't even say goodbye. I turned, walked back through the front door, and left them behind. Jenna, Brandon, the memories, the betrayals, all of it. The sun outside was too bright, almost mocking. I walked to my car feeling like a man who had survived a crash, still standing, but hollowed out inside. I didn't look back. Not once. Driving back to Rockland felt like floating through someone else's life. The familiar streets, the diners and strip malls I used to pass without a second thought, now looked foreign, like I had landed in some parallel version of my own town where nothing fit anymore. I didn't go back to the motel right away. I couldn't. The idea of sitting alone in that stale room, surrounded by silence thick enough to choke on, was too much. Instead, I found myself parked in an empty grocery store lot, staring out at the sea of shopping carts and flickering neon signs, letting the engine tick quietly in the cool air. For a long time, I didn't think. I just sat there numb. It was easier not to think. Because the second I started pulling at the thread of what had just happened, everything threatened to unravel. It wasn't just the house, the furniture, or even Toby. It wasn't the money. It was the realization that somewhere along the line, I had become invisible to the one person who was supposed to see me most clearly. Jenna hadn't fallen out of love in some slow, painful way. She had jumped ship. She had planned her escape like a prisoner waiting for the right guard to look the other way. And I had been too stupid, too trusting to notice. In the pit of my stomach, a new kind of sadness bloomed. It was heavier than rage. It was the death of something much deeper, the version of myself that still believed hard work, loyalty, and love were enough. I thought about the life we had built, or rather, the life I thought we were building. Every overtime shift I pulled to pad our savings, Every stupid couple's pottery class I sat through because she thought it would bring us closer. Every boring Sunday running errands because she wanted stability. None of it had ever really anchored her. She had been slipping away even as I built walls around us to keep the storms out. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the hollowing out of years of meaning. Like realizing you've been speaking a language nobody else understands. Eventually, the numbness gave way to exhaustion. I drove back to the motel, my body moving automatically like it didn't belong to me. Inside the room, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at nothing for a long time. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, it hit me. There was no fixing this. No apology was coming. No letter. No regret-filled phone call begging for another chance. The story wasn't going to end with reconciliation or closure. It was going to end with me standing alone in the ashes of a life I thought was real. And somehow, in that brutal, merciless truth, there was a tiny spark of freedom. She didn't get to define me anymore. She didn't get to be the author of my next chapter. If I was going to rebuild, and I would rebuild, it would be without her. Without the lies. Without the weight of someone who saw loyalty as weakness. I didn't know how to start. I didn't know who I was without her yet. But I knew, with more certainty than I had felt in months, that I would find out. Even if I had to start from nothing. Even if I had to crawl. I was done letting people decide how much of myself I was allowed to keep. Morning hit like a hammer. The cheap motel curtains couldn't keep out the sun, and my body ached from a night of tossing and turning on a mattress that felt like it was made out of plywood. But it didn't matter. Something had shifted inside me while I slept, not healed, not even close, but hardened. I wasn't going to let Jenna get the last word. By 9 a.m., I was in a coffee shop down the street, laptop open, phone buzzing with unanswered calls and texts I didn't bother reading. My hand shook a little as I logged into our old shared accounts, not out of fear anymore, but from the adrenaline of knowing I still had a few moves left. First, I checked the paperwork. I needed to know exactly how she had managed to sell the house. Somewhere deep down, I still hoped there was some technicality, some mistake I could untangle. The mortgage had been in both our names, which meant she shouldn't have been able to do anything without my consent. But sure enough, there it was, a scanned document with my signature on it. A signature I hadn't written. Forged. Sloppy. I could tell immediately. She hadn't even tried to get the curves right. And that was enough. What Jenna hadn't counted on was that, while she was busy building her fantasy life with Brandon, she left a paper trail wide enough for a blind man to follow. I called a lawyer, not a cheap one either, but someone I knew specialized in fraud cases. Within an hour, I was sitting in his office, retelling the entire humiliating saga, from the flight to Denver to the curb outside my own sold house. The lawyer listened carefully, nodding, occasionally taking notes. When I finished, he sat back, steepling his fingers like he was piecing together a puzzle he already knew how to solve. He confirmed what I was barely daring to hope. Jenna had committed felony fraud. Forging my signature, selling jointly owned property without consent, it wasn't just messy divorce material. It was criminal. And that meant leverage. Not just for whatever civil suit I wanted to file later, but for getting back what mattered. The house. The dog. The money. The dignity she thought she could strip away without a second thought. Driving away from that office, something unfamiliar started to replace the raw sadness that had been eating me alive. It wasn't revenge, not exactly. It was justice. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't reacting to what Jenna had done. I was taking control of what came next. I wasn't the man left standing in the ashes anymore. I was the man lighting a fire of his own. By the end of that day, I had filed the initial fraud report. It wasn't dramatic, no sirens or flashing lights, just a long series of forms, notarized signatures, and a quiet, heavy conversation with a detective who specialized in financial crimes. He was methodical, asking me for timelines, documents, evidence. I handed it all over without flinching. Every forged signature, every text message, every transfer she thought I wouldn't notice. It was exhausting, sitting there recounting every betrayal in sterile, legal terms. Transaction history, ownership disputes, unauthorized access. Words that made it sound clinical, when really it was just the death of a marriage disguised as paperwork. The detective didn't say much, but there was a look he gave me when I finished, something between pity and quiet respect. I wasn't the first guy to be gutted by someone he trusted, and I wouldn't be the last. But not everyone fought back. I left the station with a strange kind of calm settling over me. It wasn't peace. It was more like standing in the eye of a hurricane, knowing the worst part was coming, but finally feeling ready to face it head-on. The next 48 hours blurred into one long stretch of preparation. Calls with the lawyer, emailing copies of every document I could scrape together, printing out old emails Jenna had sent me that accidentally contradicted what she must have told the real estate agents. pulling bank statements, recording the timeline down to the day she started quietly moving furniture out of the house under the excuse of donating old stuff. By the third day, a cease and desist letter had been drafted and delivered to Jenna's new address. It was official now. She wasn't just my ex-wife-to-be. She was a defendant. Word must have traveled fast, because that afternoon, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I could imagine exactly how the conversation would have gone. Jenna accusing me of overreacting, begging me to think about how this looks. Maybe even trying to gaslight me into believing this was somehow my fault. But I wasn't that man anymore. I spent the night in the motel flipping through old photo albums, not because I missed her, but because I needed to remind myself of something important. There had been a time when I didn't know her. A time when I built happiness out of nothing but stubbornness and hope. I had done it once. I could do it again. The house might be gone. The marriage might be over. The life I thought I had might have been a carefully staged lie. But I was still standing. Maybe a little bloodied. Maybe a little harder. But standing, all the same. And somewhere deep inside, under the wreckage she left behind, there was still a man worth fighting for. By the end of the week, the fallout began to hit Jenna like a freight train. The detective assigned to my case didn't waste time. They interviewed the real estate agent who brokered the sale, pulled the documents she had signed, compared the forged papers against official ones from our mortgage company. Piece by piece, the story unraveled, and it wasn't even a complicated one. It was desperation dressed up as self-righteousness. A patchwork of half-lies Jenna had convinced herself would hold together long enough for her to build a new life. It didn't. An official notice arrived at her doorstep, summoning her for questioning regarding the fraudulent sale. It didn't take long for the texts to start pouring in, from Jenna, from mutual friends, even from her sister, who had apparently been kept in the dark. Everyone had their version of the story. Some were pleading with me to drop it for the sake of peace. Some were furious, calling me vindictive. But the truth was, there was no peace left to protect. She burned it the day she erased me from our life without a second thought. The motel room felt smaller every day, but at least it was honest. Nothing inside it pretended to be something it wasn't. Every night, I would lie in that scratchy bed, staring up at the cracked ceiling, thinking about all the years I spent trying to be the dependable one, the one who stayed when things got hard, the one who built something solid because he believed solid things could last. Maybe the cruelest part wasn't that she left. Maybe the cruelest part was how easily she rewrote our entire story once she decided she was done with it. Some nights, I would wonder if she ever loved me at all. If every kiss, every whispered plan for the future, was just a costume she put on because it fit at the time. Other nights, the anger would come back like a flood, and I would sit up in bed making mental lists of all the things she had stolen from me. My home, my trust, the years I spent thinking I was building something unshakable. But every morning I woke up, and every morning I got out of bed. And in some small, stubborn way, that was winning. When Jenna finally called, the number flashing across my screen like a final, desperate signal, I didn't pick up. I didn't need to hear the excuses, the tearful half-truths, the sudden convenient regrets. She wasn't calling because she missed me. She was calling because the walls were finally closing in. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I didn't owe her anything. Not my attention, not my forgiveness, not even my anger. She had spent so much time painting herself as the victim, she never stopped to think what would happen if the truth caught up. Now it had, and it wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I was still bruised, still picking up the pieces, still staring down the long road of rebuilding from scratch. But at least now, for the first time in years, the road was mine alone to walk. The days after that were strangely quiet. No more calls from Jenna. No more late-night texts from friends trying to convince me that forgiveness was some noble act I owed the woman who gutted my life. The noise died down, and in the silence, something unexpected started to happen. I started to breathe again. At first, it was just the small things. Sleeping through the night without waking up in a panic. Drinking a cup of gas station coffee without feeling it churn in my stomach like acid. Taking short walks around the block without the weight of humiliation pressing down on me with every step. The motel room, once a tomb, started to feel less like a prison and more like a cocoon. Ugly. Temporary. Necessary. I spent hours updating my resume, looking for short-term leases, thinking about cities I used to dream about moving to back when life still felt wide open. There was something almost intoxicating about the idea that, for the first time in almost a decade, I had no obligations anchoring me to a place that had become poisoned with memories. Jenna's legal troubles were out of my hands now. My lawyer was handling the civil side, and the district attorney's office had picked up the criminal investigation. Whether or not she faced serious consequences wasn't mine to decide. I had set the truth in motion. What happened next was on her. My fight wasn't against her anymore. It was against the part of me that still wanted to sit in the ashes and cry over what could have been. One afternoon, while I was sitting on a park bench with a sandwich I wasn't really hungry for, I watched a little kid run across the grass with a kite. His parents laughed from a distance, relaxed in a way I hadn't been in years. And it hit me. Happiness doesn't come from trying to drag someone along who doesn't want to walk beside you. It doesn't come from building castles for people who are already planning their escape routes. It comes from knowing who you are when there's no one left to perform for. No one to impress. No one to hold together when they're determined to fall apart. I wasn't the man who lost everything anymore. I was the man who survived it. And survival, in its own rough, battered way, was a kind of victory. Not the kind you celebrate with champagne and fireworks. The kind you honor quietly by getting up every morning, putting one foot in front of the other, and building a new life, brick by brick, with no one's hands but your own. It's been a few months now. I moved out of Rockland, left behind the neighborhoods heavy with memories I didn't want anymore. Found a small apartment 2 towns over. Nothing fancy, just clean walls, my own key, and a bed I paid for with my own hands. A place no one could take from me this time. I adopted a dog from the shelter. Not Toby. I still think about him sometimes, but I had to let that go too. This dog, I named him Chance, is a mutt with too much energy and a crooked tail, and he's exactly what I needed. The court case against Jenna dragged on longer than I wanted it to, but the ending didn't matter as much as I thought it would. Whether she faced a fine or something worse wasn't my closure. It never was. The real closure came the day I realized I didn't need an apology to move on. I didn't need her acknowledgement. I didn't need her understanding. I needed me. And I still had that. Bruised, battered, but intact. There are moments where the grief still hits, small and unexpected. Standing in a grocery store, seeing a brand of coffee we used to share. Hearing a song that once belonged to long drives we took without speaking, comfortable in our silence. But the pain passes faster now. It doesn't settle in and set up camp the way it used to. If you're reading this because you're sitting in your own version of a broken motel room, wondering how it got this bad, wondering if you'll ever feel normal again, here's what I can tell you. You will. But you won't be the same. You'll be harder in some ways, softer in others. You'll learn where your real limits are, and you'll learn that most of the time, they're farther than you ever thought possible. You'll lose things you thought you couldn't live without, and you'll live anyway. You'll realize the worst day of your life wasn't the end. It was just the start of a story you never planned to tell. The people who betray you don't get to write your ending. Only you do. And if you're anything like me, someday you'll look back, not with bitterness, but with something even stronger, pride. Because you survived. Because you built something better. Because you chose yourself when no one else would. And that's the kind of victory no one can take away.